I just want to welcome you all here this afternoon. I'm really excited today because we have an amazing guest with us. She is an author, a publisher. She's been an award-winning journalist. She's had some recognition for her investigative reporting. She has an amazing wealth of professional experience and a wonderful story to tell today. And her story is also about her relationship with the Lord and how the Lord brought her through so much in her life through that journey. So I just want to welcome Marianne Curtis here today. And I'm so pleased. She's a good friend of mine and a wonderful. If you ever get to meet Marianne, I'll just give you a quick example. Uh, she came to a baptism in Birds Hill Park, and she showed up and she just said, the Lord just guided me here, just directed me here. And she was such a blessing. She had such a timely message for that young man, and she really blessed the family from Ontario and the young man. So if you ever get the privilege to meet Marianne, it's a wonderful experience. So welcome, Marianne.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I am really blessed because I had the chance to kind of go back to some of your books and review some of your work. And in researching and finding out things, I found out that you ran a group for young writers up north. You partnered with a gentleman and you did some mentorship work for our families up north. So maybe start with sharing a little bit about that experience.
Oh, that was an unexpected offer. That there was some young authors that were looking. They wanted to know more about publishing and what it took to write their stories and everything. And having been a survivor of so much myself, I see the I acknowledge and encourage the value. There's a value in being able to share those stories. Once it's out, it's gone, and a lot of it is release, right? And to be able to encourage people to release some of the things that they need, that they've been holding in and couldn't, it was huge. And so yeah, there was a few students there and that grasped it, and I think one has actually published a book now, and it was their story and the being able to heal afterwards, letting it go, was part of it.
That's exciting. We know, because this is part of what we do here at A Courageous Heart, is we share the stories of surviving and overcoming something in your life. And the willingness to, just like what you've expressed, go back and do something for those that are still there. So maybe take us through that journey, your journey, and what it was that you survived and your story.
Wow. It's been a while since I've shared it, actually. But the short version, I was given up for adoption at birth, and adopted into a Christian family or Catholic family. I was the youngest of 3 children, and my mom couldn't have children, so they decided to adopt. And yeah, grew up in Ontario, came to Manitoba. Very things didn't get. I had a normal childhood, more or less, until we moved to Manitoba. And at that point, I don't know whether my mom was mental illness or what, but things turned, and I had a very difficult childhood, and it made things hard. Lot of physical abuse, starvation, locked in the basement for days on end, and things I have a hard time talking about because like at one point I was like everybody. I wanted everybody to hear my story. I needed that validation. I needed that to know I survived something instead of being stuck there anymore. And that was part of why I sat down and wrote it out, was because nobody believed me. No one believed that any of this could be possible. And so when you have no voice, to suddenly like couldn't find an audience, so I wrote it out. And
So,
sometimes that's what you have to do. You have to let it go.
so you've written three. So this is the original
Yeah.
story, correct? Finding Gloria,
Yeah.
and you wrote it in your original name, Mary.
Uh, I found, yeah, my birth name was Gloria Jean. And
Okay.
then when I was adopted, my mother hated the name and she chose to change it to Marianne. And I didn't find that out until I was about 18 that my birth name was Gloria Jean. And
Okay.
then I got my adopted name and found my birth mom, and that's all part of the story too. I had no identity for so long, and then all of a sudden I had all this. Yeah, it's.
So how was writing, like you said, you felt like at one point you needed people to hear the story, and then you found writing as an avenue to your vehicle to get the story out there. Um, in my research, you have like 14 plus books that you've written and published, and that's a lot of writing. Um, what was it that drove you, and what was the benefit of being able to put your story down on paper? And
I think for me it was a matter of survival, because it had gotten to the point where I would tell people what I was going through, and people were like, "Oh, that's not that bad," or "Go here, go that." There was no real assistance, and this was before I knew God the way I do now. So I needed that validation, because I was to the point where I was either running or suicidal, or there was always something, and I needed that outlet. So again, I'm not a Christian yet, but I was asking God to lead me. And I was already working as a journalist. I'd been writing for 25 years for a newspaper, or at that time, 15 years. And he encouraged me. He's like, "Marianne," he says, "you're out here helping women doing, on the streets doing this kind of stuff. Like, you need to tell them where you came from." Like, he couldn't even believe where I came from. And being in the Steinbach area, nobody, stories like mine didn't come out of the closet very much. Like a lot of secrets. Everybody has skeletons, but to be brave enough to bring it to the table, and I was brave. Oh yeah, nothing like airing your dirty laundry in a Mennonite community. It wouldn't go over very well. It did. But God had a purpose in it, and I didn't know. I didn't see it then. And if you read them now, it's very different, because Finding Gloria, as opposed to the new one, the Lord made me rewrite it, because I didn't. When you read the first book, you see God wasn't in it. I was full of bitterness, rage, like not anger or rage, but the emotions. My pain was there, and then to have God basically not minimize my pain, but just show me why I went through it, and to turn all those questions I had of having no identity, not knowing, being raised, being told I was given up for adoption because I was spawn of Satan, to actually discover I'm a child of God. It was revelationary. It was life changing. And it's what I had been seeking for, at that point, 50 years. And it was a hard adjustment. Like, trust me, like when I gave my life to God 5 years ago, I didn't know what He had in store for me. Like, when everybody said, "Become a Christian, walk this way," I saw it very different than what I actually have been experiencing.
that's that's a tremendous amount of passion and excitement that not only you have for your craft and your gift, but that you have put into your walk with the Lord and your desire to do something with the story. Like you said, you went all the way up north to mentor young people in the same craft that God gave you so that you could help yourself heal. You could put it on the pages for other people to pick it up, and like I said, in some of the research, reading the reviews and hearing over and over and over, I can see now that that willingness, that determination to survive, resilience. The words were children can recover. Like, you just brought hope to so many people, and this in those stories, and so it's amazing to imagine all the people that have picked up those books and just kind of grabbed one off the shelf, or read it online and said, "Wow, there's there's my story, and there's hope for me too. I think that's the piece that the message that we want to give people, and his name is Jesus, right? Right. So that's the exciting part that I see in telling these stories is yes, it was very difficult, and I'm sure there's pages where I could pick it up and I could relate to some of those pages, but not to the depth of some women, or maybe I can relate to the pain of adoption exactly, and I understand those things, but other women, they need to hear that story. And so, I have so much respect for what you've done and what you've shared. And we just kind of had that discussion during a few minutes ago about one of the comments. She poured her whole soul onto the pages, and what that took. That takes tremendous courage to go through that and to have people look at that and say, whatever it is that they're going to say, and then allow yourself to grow through that. But what that reminds me of is a pillar. So pillars go through tremendous amount of pressure. They go through tremendous amount of oppression, maybe, to become something strong, something that stands, something that other people can be supported by. And so that's how I see that, as God was making you into a pillar for your community, for those other women and other men and other people that need somewhere to go to, and it's their turn to tell their story. And, we want community to heal. You shared about a particular, when you were very young, a particular story called Brian's Last Ride. And if you were able to say to young people, whether it's experiences out of your book or driving, and we all know there's a lot of laws right now that we're allowed to use different substances on the road and in public, and it makes things difficult and it makes things scary. What would be your words of caution to young people today?
Are not invincible. Oh, yeah, that was a night that changed my life. It's okay. I was a teen runaway. I was in foster care. I met my neighbors. They were Christians. They invited me to a young people's group every Friday. They had like groups of teenagers, and it was my first time in church after being a runaway, and it was a choice to go. And of course, boys everywhere and everything, and yeah, unfortunately, the night ended up in tragedy because the boys were showing off and took me out on a dirt bike ride, and we ended up getting hit by another dirt bike, and the guy on the second bike died. I didn't know until the next day. I ended up in the hospital, and they told us, and they were worried that I was going to break, and that changed me. That changed who I was, to be 15 years old and know that, and there was a lot of guilt with that. If I hadn't been there, would he still be alive? It took me about 10 years to get over that. And, it was just a perfect example. It was a beautiful night. Hey, we want to show you where we live. We just live down the road. Let's get on this bike and go for a ride. We were at church. No one was drinking. No one was on drugs. It was just an out, And then the aftermath. It was the aftermath to watch it affected the whole community. The kids, the graduating class, so many kids that knew this young man, they became alcoholics. You can see how that trauma, because it was never dealt with. The community didn't. It happened. Everybody moved on with their lives. There wasn't the assistance. There wasn't classes. Let's do a session at school to discuss what happened, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's lifetime ramifications to that. And yeah, it's something simple. It's never, if you're not supposed to be there, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, it was something that it took me a long time to get over. And I thought I was supposed to die that. I wanted, why me? Why not me? Because yeah.
Hmm.
And the Lord's like, no, it wasn't the way it was. And now to be able to, I run into some of those people now, and to be able to minister to them, it's changing that too. To be able to, that's not your burden to carry anymore, because some have not let go.
I think one of the terminologies that people use is survivor's guilt. And in so many ways, I've seen people bring up the term survivor's guilt for maybe they're with their friends and their friend goes missing or doesn't come home, or they experience something similar and they're left to wonder why me. Um, I think it's so important that when you have something like that go on in the community, we do have safeguards. We do go out of our way to put in things in place for our young people, somewhere to call, a 1-800 number. Any of those types of scenarios is so important. Um, and another area that you were sharing about was the Manitoba Legislative, where you were able to share your story about bullying, right, with people on the floor and advocating. That's so important. How did that come about for you?
That was huge. That was the first time I stood up and shared my story. And that was the Bill 18 was coming down, the anti-bullying bylaw. Calvin Gertson was our MLA and still is. And he was on that committee, and people that I grew up with in Steinbach, they're like, Marianne, you gotta. I just one day wrote a Facebook message saying, you know what, you guys talk about bullying. Do you remember? It was what instigated that was me watching people that bullied me to the point that I didn't want to go to school anymore, advocating for that this was a stupid. And I was like, wait a minute, you guys, hang on, hold the phone here. And then I shared my story and how I'll never forget grade 6 being stripped down in the locker room by the girls in my class, and covered with bruises and stuff like the bullying was atrocious, and everybody denied it. And so yeah, push it came to shove. So it took me some while, and then I wrote this speech. Didn't plan on presenting it, and at the last minute, I see now it was God just lining things up. I got up there, and when I had the education minister in tears, and he said, "I can't believe this happened in a Manitoba school," and again, I hate to say it, in Steinbach. And it was eye-opening. And I say this cautiously, but I would say I led the first Me Too, #MeToo movement in Steinbach, because then people started coming out. People started sharing their stories. And then the rose-colored glasses were off. And in some ways, it was a good thing. In some ways, it wasn't, because we kind of opened up a can of worms. But at the same time, there's been a lot that has changed in the community as a result. And again, some you don't realize sometimes, you're carrying so much and just speaking your truth. Whether people want to listen to it or not, it changes things. And it led to actually somebody who bullied me in school apologizing because he had been challenged by people in his church to his young people's class. He remembered talking me off a high diving board, and I almost drowned in grade 8. And his young people's class told him, hey, have you ever considered finding her and apologizing? And he messaged me, and he apologized. He says, I'd never forgotten that day. He says, I'll never forget, you almost drowned. He says, I've taught every kid, all my children, to not be bullies, because I'll never forget them pulling you out of the pool. And we did that to you.
Marianne, today you've just shared again your heart with us. And I just want to thank you for that incredible courage that it takes to open up your heart and share what's happened in your life with those of us who need to know that, so that we can make changes, be aware, and advocate for our young people to learn from those lessons, that we don't have to walk down those same roads. So I just thank you so much for coming and sharing that with us today.
Thank you for having me again. It was a pleasure.